And it's one of the rare areas where President Trump and former President Biden's goals are similar, an attempt to bring key manufacturing from China back to the U.S. The Biden administration levied targeted tariffs on semiconductors, particularly from China, as a means of supporting investments and creating good jobs in key sectors. Yesterday, as we just saw, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that some electronics powered by semiconductors, such as smartphones and computers, will fall under separate tariffs that will be announced in about a month. Joining us to discuss this escalating trade war with China is Mike Leon, NTD News contributor and host of the Can We Please Talk podcast, and Michael Busler, professor of finance at Stockton University. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. Mike Leon, starting with you, there was a momentary sigh of relief to find out that electronic products like iPhones would be exempted from Trump's 145% tariffs on China, though as we just saw, Lutnick now warning there will be some form of tariffs coming. What were your thoughts to Trump's reprieve and then Lutnick's comments just yesterday?
Yeah, I'm glad you started with that. Good morning, first off, to both of you guys. But, I'm glad you started with that because something that Lutnick said there that's very important, and I'm sure Mike will get into it in his response, is really about the way we manufacture things. It's very expensive to do it here, Kerry. There's a reason why we import from other countries. We can get into the myriad of reasons for that in terms of labor and in terms of cost. But when businesses are looking to produce something, a lot of the times, it's not that they're neglecting U.S. market. It's that U.S. labor and the cost of doing business in the U.S. is expensive. The reason why President Trump has done these tariffs, as I've said numerous times, I'm talking to people that cover the Treasury Department and economics more broadly, is because of the negotiating ploy in all of this. And Howard said this in kind of that package as well. It's a negotiating chip to bring people to the table to reset the way we do global trade. But when I saw that this was announced on the electronics front, the first thing that came in my mind, Kerry, was, well, this is smart because, again, this is an industry where the cost of doing business for companies like an Apple, like Samsung, whoever it is that has these products made overseas and imports them here and sells them here, the cost of doing labor here would be so astronomically expensive and would really hurt a lot of these businesses because, again, a lot of the things that people talk about is, well, you can get it from another market, you can do it in another place. It's like it's to do all those production costs and to move all of those things to another country is very tough to do. So I'm happy that that's part of it. But again, I want people to think about the overall strategy, which is how he's using tariffs to kind of reset the trade market.
And Mike Leon, just as a quick follow-up to that, though, I think the concern is also, of course, it's not just that they're outsourced, but that it's outsourced to, call it a frenemy or, potentially rival, military rival for sure. So how would you address that component of it?
Yeah. Kerry, great point, first and foremost. But I will echo something that was echoed to Caroline Leavitt on Friday in the White House press briefing. If we're treating a foe like that, but we're also treating friends like that with respect to these tariffs, how should one decipher? Like, how should an ally of ours, specifically what we saw and the initial onset with Canada and Mexico and the way we were talking to both countries that are here in North America, how should they take it when we're treating a foe the same way, a perceived foe, let's call it, on that stage, like you just mentioned, Kerry? So I think, again, one of the things, and I'm from the communications background part of this, right? I would love for more of a messaging standpoint of not every business sector is going to get their own conference of how this is going to impact them, but how we move forward from all of this. What is the overarching plan without giving away too much of the secret sauce, right, Kerry? And I think the administration, in my estimation, hasn't done the best job of communicating that. I think there needs to be some more of that. And that's why we see it reflected in some of these numbers that have come out recently on this CBS News poll in terms of how President Trump's handling the economy. I would tell people, just give it a second, but I do think there needs to be more of an explaining from this. And I think the friends right now that are aligned with us are saying, well, wait a minute, we're kind of being treated the same way the foes are being treated. So I think the administration needs to do a better job of explaining that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, and we should shift over to the economic component of it. So going over to you, Michael Busler. Trump wants electronics, AI, steel, other metals, and pharmaceuticals to be made in the U.S. as a matter of national security. And Biden, before him with the CHIPS Act, also had those goals. The question economically, though, is can he achieve that while minimizing the short-term economic pain that Americans are feeling in terms of both the costs at the grocery store and other key items, but also in the value of their market-driven retirement accounts?
So that's the big problem. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. That's the big problem Trump is trying to face now. those products that are vital for national security, steel, aluminum, copper, medical supplies, those things really should be produced in America. And as Mike correctly pointed out, why aren't they? And the reason is it's so much less expensive to produce them in countries where the labor costs are only a fraction of what the costs are here. So the ultimate goal is to bring those products back without causing shocks to our economy in terms of inflation spikes or seeing what's happening to people's investment accounts. The way to bring those products back is to bring them back capital intensive rather than labor intensive. So what does that mean? So we produce in China now, they pay their workers $1 an hour, and it's much less expensive. When we bring them back here, we're going to have to make them using capital goods, robots, artificial intelligence, automation. By doing that, we're going to have to try to get the cost down to where it was similar to the cost of producing in China. It will be very difficult. You also brought up a point about inflation shocks. So regardless of what anybody says, a tariff is a cost and it adds to the cost of the product. As a result of that, it tends to push prices up. How much of the tariff is paid by the consumer and how much is paid by the producer is dependent upon how badly consumers feel they need the products. In other words, if Mercedes now will be much more because there's a tariff, it's a car made in Germany. If people say, well, I have to have a Mercedes, there's nothing else I could drive. If they take that view, they're going to pay most of the tariff. On the other hand, if people say, well, if Mercedes go up in price, I don't have to have a Mercedes, I can buy a Cadillac, I think it's just as good. If that's the case, then the consumers will pay very little of the tariff. Still, tariffs tend to raise prices. So how will Trump keep the inflation rate down? I mentioned this on the show before. He's going to vastly increase the supply of energy, clean coal, natural gas, oil. By vastly increasing the supply of energy, that'll bring the price of energy down. Energy is a big component in the consumer price index, so it'll offset any price increases in those goods we just talked about by bringing down the price of energy.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff in there. In particular, capital, not labor. I recently heard a quote, you're not going to lose your job to AI, you're going to lose your job to someone who's better at using AI, and I think you really nailed that. Staying with you, Michael Busler, China accelerating their currency devaluation in response to Trump's tariffs. What are your thoughts on that?
See, China does a lot of things wrong. They dump products, they manipulate their currency, they put quotas on how much we can bring into their country. So in these new trade agreements with all the countries, and I've heard that virtually every country in the world has come to the U.S. to negotiate these better trade agreements except China. The negotiation with China will be very difficult because not only do we want their markets open, we want them to not manipulate their currency, not put any quotas on things, and make it as close to a free market as possible. I don't know if China's going to go along with that, and that'll make the China negotiation extremely difficult.
Yes, and now bringing this over to Mike Leon, China's also using other non-economic tools, particularly military aggression. We're seeing escalations in the waters near Taiwan. I believe one general came forward saying that these are not routine things. These are actually rehearsals for war. And then we're also seeing Chinese troops fighting in Ukraine. So how do these CCP provocations play into the trade war?
Yeah, it's a great point, Kerry. And we just had a foreign correspondent from G0 Media on the program talking about this because I think this has kind of been swept under the rug a little bit. I don't know if people have seen these training exercises that China was conducting in Taiwan, around Taiwan, and this escalation and whether or not Xi Jinping, invades Taiwan, some military experts will tell you it's only a matter of time within the next 3 to 4 years is this planned invasion. Now, China hasn't been at war, so we would see how their military would perform. But this doesn't help the talks as part of this. And I think something that somebody said to me recently on my program, Kerry, was about the way Trump views, the global stage. And it's really from a real estate developer's mind. I kind of want to echo it here for a second, because it made sense to me that he viewed getting his neighborhood tight because he was going up against a competing neighborhood. And I think China and Xi Jinping it's reflected with respect to these military exercises, but also they're dominant in that region. We already saw something that Australia has kind of backed away from doing some trade businesses with them. And I think they want to be dominant in that region. They don't want to be told that they can't. They always felt that Taiwan should be part of the mainland, and they don't want any type of intervention, or at least any type of U.S. Military within that area of the South Sea. And they want to control that. And I don't think this is going to help with the negotiations part of this, as Michael mentioned before, because it's the good faith argument part of this, right? Are you coming to the table in good faith, knowing what we know now about China's aggression? And President Biden faced this, and President Trump's going to face this as well. He knows China's our biggest threat right now. He talked about recently about those Chinese soldiers that were found in Ukraine, and that there'll be an investigation. We'll see where that nets out, if there is even one. But all of this doesn't help when you're trying to talk to somebody about how we move forward amicably and do business together, Kerry. So it's something that I think should be on more people's radars. And I've talked to members of the House that are on the China Relations Committee. Representative Seth Moulton was recently on the show. This has been something that they've been warning about for years, and the dangers of China potentially not only invading Taiwan, but involving us in another military operation, or how we would support Taiwan with that respect. Are we going to do the same way, where we do use taxpayer money to help Taiwan with respect to weaponry, or do we send boots on the ground like we do out there with the naval ships that we have? So this is something that I think should catch everyone's attention, but it doesn't help with respect to the talks that Michael was talking about earlier, and how we actually play nice with our competitive superpower.
Yeah, these two dynamics of military and economy go hand in glove for sure. We see certainly China underwriting a good component of Russia's ability to be aggressive with Ukraine, because they're selling all their oil to China. So in that respect, and through that lens, Michael Busler, as we finish up, being that the U.S. imports anywhere from 3 to 5 times more than we export to China, that leaves Beijing only so much ability to escalate tariffs while devaluing their currency. So knowing that the regime has this mindset of survive at all costs, what chess moves does that leave Beijing?
So I think Beijing may be boxing itself into a little bit of a corner here, in that Trump will not back down. And it's true. We import about $450 billion worth of goods from China. They import less than $150 billion from us. So one way to reduce some of their military action is to reduce their economic dependence. So if we can get those tariffs in place and shift manufacturing from China back to the U.S., that's a few $100 billion a year of U.S. money that's not going to China, that feeds a lot of China's military activities. So you're right to say that the economic and military goes hand in hand. It's going to, again, be a very difficult negotiation. The tariff negotiation and the economic negotiations are very difficult as they are, but then you throw in the military aspect and it makes it extremely difficult. Coming up with a final agreement with China, I think, will be very tough. But look, President Trump is a deal maker. I think he knows how to do this. And I'm still confident that in the end, we end up with a situation that's very beneficial to Americans economically. We bring jobs back to the U.S. We bring back manufacturing of vital goods that are vital to national security. And if somehow we can work on minimizing China's aggression, we have this problem with Russia too, minimizing China's aggression, that'll be a big plus.
So much to unpack here. The stage certainly being set. Appreciate you gentlemen joining me this morning. Mike Leon, NTD News contributor and the host of the Can We Please Talk podcast. Michael Busler, professor of finance with Stockton University. Have a great day, gentlemen.
Listen, if we even think you owe us money, you won't know what hit you. We'll put liens on everything you own. Raid your bank accounts, retirement fund, pension. You'll open up your paycheck and cry because we'll already have the money.
Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.